I am sitting with a murderer, I am chatting with a murderer, I've gathered hardcore evidence of someone murdering somebody. And you say I shouldn't collaborate with the police?
Isn't it their job to find the murderer?
You see, the police by themselves cannot do all the work.
Why not?
Maybe if you are in
trained.
America, you can talk. You can talk the way you are talking. If you are in Canada, this is Africa.
The ethics of a journalist who is also an activist creates some fascinating conundrums. With me to explore these, the head of radio journalism at Wits, Franz Kruger. Very good to have you with us. Where do you draw the line there?
Well, it's interesting that you describe him as an activist. I mean, I think he's primarily an undercover journalist, and we have, people in South Africa who have done that kind of work, and both for television and for print and in other media. It is, of course, a difficult line to draw. But clearly, I think the kind of work that Anas has done has won him a lot of support, and he's managed to really expose some really nasty stuff that's going on in Ghana, and he's rightly drawn a lot of a lot of approval for that. As an investigative journalist, and we'll go back to activism a little bit later on, but what are the lines there? I mean, how closely can you collude with police? When is it okay to give up names? Well, that is an interesting question, and I think that certainly in South Africa, I think journalists would tend to shy away from direct collaboration with the police. There have been a couple of exceptions, but as a rule, I think, given our history, given where we come from, I think journalists would prefer not to collaborate directly with the police. I'm thinking here of Jacques Poe, actually, who some years ago worked with the police around exposing somebody who was accused of genocide in Rwanda, if memory serves. So that was quite an unusual case. I think in general journalists would prefer to do their work publicly, to expose by all means, sometimes undercover, and then report to the public. Rather than, state organizations of various kinds. When do you think it's okay to do it? I mean, how do you work out that justification? Well, I think every circumstance is different, and I think people have to make their own minds. For me, I think one of the really clear lines where it becomes possible to do that is where something really serious harm can be prevented. I think that where there is real risk to life, or something of a similar magnitude, then, I think that one stretches those lines. And what about entrapment? No, I think entrapment is never okay. I don't think that's okay for the police themselves. I don't think it's okay for journalists, because I think then you're actually creating a situation rather than simply reporting on it. And I think then people can always come back afterwards and say, oh, well, you lured me into a situation that I wouldn't have otherwise gone into. You've heard of, there was something I was involved in with Syria, where a lawyer was buying girls from ISIL and then taking him out, and when courts got involved, he got into trouble because they felt that he was blurring the line. 60 Minutes did something similar, didn't they? That was also a form of entrapment. So again, it's really hard, isn't it, when you feel that morally you should be doing something to help, but actually it could get you in greater danger. Yes, well, that's another dynamic, isn't it? Is that you don't want to, you obviously have a legitimate desire not to put yourself in any danger. As I say, I think entrapment is problematical generally, because I think, it undermines people's belief in what you're doing. It can do, simply because they're able to say, well, it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been there. And I think that's a line that I would be very cautious to cross. We touched on activism, and you said you were surprised that we called him an activist. You are increasingly seeing journalists becoming activists, putting their opinions forward and getting involved in a cause. When is that okay? Is it ever okay? Well, you say increasingly, but I mean, under apartheid, we had a lot of activist journalists who did their very best to expose the evils of the system at the time, and it was a kind of activism. Maybe visually you're seeing it more, Yes. I mean, I think that it has always had its place. And you can go back in history and you can find people who've done that kind of journalism, and it's been really valuable very often. I do think that it needs to be honest. I think readers, viewers need to know what they're getting. And I do think that it is only one part of the landscape, and I think ultimately it's also really important to respect viewers, citizens' right to make up their own mind. So when it's part of a mix, I'm okay with it. It would be a pity if that was all that we were doing.
And I guess, like with Jacques Pauw's latest book, President's Keepers, you've got to have checks and balances all the way through, don't you? You've got to keep account of everything that you do.
Well, of course, yes. I mean, you have to be really sure of your facts. I mean, if you're going to make an argument, make it on the basis of facts that are clearly, clearly there and can be followed by other people. I think that's really important.
Going back to his comments about he's got to do it because the police in Africa don't do it and it might be different elsewhere. Do you think that's a fair justification for working the way he does?
Well, I mean, if one doesn't know, not being a Ghanaian, I think it's kind of hard to follow exactly the logic and to understand exactly where he's coming from. I think one should be cautious about going too far down that road, simply because we have our particular role as journalists, and I think it's about informing people rather than fixing the world's ills. I think that it's enough of a contribution, really, to make sure that the information that needs to get out gets out to people so that they can take whatever action needs to be taken. I think fixing, actively sorting out crime, sorting out social ills of various kinds, I think we're out of our depths, actually. We'd better leave that to people who can do it.
Yeah, as tempting as it might be. Franz,
yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.